So it's part 2 of lesson 10. We've set up our server app and we've got one API method running. All the code is now on GitHub. If anybody needs it, I've put the link in the chat. But again, please make sure you put your own database credentials in the globals file in config. So when we call our API in the browser, our controller is talking to MongoDB. I'm actually going to comment out, we may not need the Mongoose reference. I have a feeling I think we shouldn't need it. I'm just going to try that because our controller calls the model and the model references Mongoose. I think this should work without this reference, but we'll see. Oh. My server's offline because I was running my git commands. So I need to run nodemon. Yeah, so it still works, so we don't actually need that reference. We don't need Mongoose here. I'll just say this is our... Okay, so now we've got an API on the back end. We can leave the server end of things. We can leave this for now. We now want to start building out the front end using the Angular CLI, the command line interface that we installed and we worked with last week. So I'm going to run all of that stuff inside. We've got our server folder. I also want to create a client folder. And then we're going to run the Angular CLI inside the client folder. So let's make a new directory called client. And then I'm going to open, I've already got my terminal window running here. I'm going to need a second terminal. So I'll use this one here inside for doing my server stuff. I'm going to go to a separate command prompt so that we can generate the Angular client. And we'll need two command windows because we have to run the server and the client app separately. So open up a Mac terminal or a Windows command prompt, and let's go into your project SPA folder. And if I do a dir here, we can see what's inside. And then I want to go inside the client directory. So I'm going to run the command cd client. It'll take me inside the client app. And we want to run the Angular CLI in here. So we're going to run, actually bear with me for just a second. I want to think about this. Do I want to run it inside the client app, or do we want the Angular app to build client? Sorry, you know what? Yes. Sorry, I'm going to delete the client app. And I'm going to let the Angular CLI build it. So we'll do cd ... I apologize, don't mean to confuse you. We're just back in the root of our project SPA. I'm sorry. I'm going to delete my client folder. And I'll use the Angular scaffolding, the CLI, to build it. So I'll do ng new client. So this will build the client directory and create the Angular app inside of it. So we'll try running ng new client in the root of our project SPA. Sorry about the confusion. We're going to say yes to Angular routing. So choose Y here. I'm going to hit the Enter key for just plain CSS, which is the default. And now Angular creates the client folder and it builds the app inside. So this is going to take a little while to install all the packages that Angular needs. A little slower than it should be, but that's okay. We'll just let it run. This should be finished by now. I'll have to let it go for a minute. Not exactly sure what seems to be hanging it. So I may have to run this command again. I think this is maybe crashed. Okay, so here's my client. Maybe it's just slow. I guess it's still running because I don't yet have the app source. Here's my app folder. So it looks like it did work. I'm going to open another command window and see. I'll just let that one run. So I'm going to go into my client app, and I'm going to see if I can now run the Angular app. Yeah, I got this error that Git is not recognized. I'm not sure what's happening with mine. May have to delete it and run it again. I'm going to see. If I do ng serve ---- open, we'll see if the Angular app ever finished building. Close a few windows here. Not that that should really affect things, but so you can try to run ng inside the client folder. You could try to run, do cd client and then ng serve -- open. I'll also close my original project tracker. I don't think I need it. Yours is running. Okay, good. Says it's running. So my command window just got stuck. And it's odd when I hit -- open, it should open the project, which it didn't do. But it is running. Okay. So my one command window somehow just got stuck. Don't worry about it. So we've got our API, our server running on localhost 3000. We've got our Angular client app running inside on the default port 4200. So now we want to build a component that can render our project data in HTML. So we're going to stop our Angular app for a minute because what we want to do is run the ng generate component. We built a project component. We scaffolded one last week. We're going to do it again. So I'll go to my Angular window where it says our app is running on 4200. I'll just hit Control-C to stop it. And I'm inside the client folder. And I think we need to go inside of our app folder because we want our component generated here. Can't remember if we did this last week inside. We'll do cd app. Oh, whoops. cd src app. We're going to go into the app folder, and we want to build a component here. So we're going to run ng generate component project. This will build our component in TypeScript along with the HTML and CSS file. So inside of app, it creates a subfolder called project, and then it creates our HTML, our TypeScript spec, our TS component, and the CSS. So DJ, you have to make sure you're in the client folder first, right? So notice where I started. So inside my client folder, I changed into the app directory. Sorry, it's cd src app. So first I did app and I got this error. System cannot find the path. Went into source app, and then I ran ng generate component. So if we go and look in the code editor, we now have under app, just like we have last week, here's our project component. And in our HTML, right now it says project works. So we could change this heading. We'll change that to maybe be an H1, and we'll call it project tracker. Now, does anybody remember what we need to do to change? So if I launch the app again, so I'll go cd ... and cd ... I'm going to go back to the client folder and run ng serve again. So we had to stop the server in order to generate our component. I want to start the Angular server again. And then we want to change the home page. So instead of loading the template component, it loads our project component. So go back to the client folder, run ng serve again. Your app will recompile. Which will take a minute. Says it's up back running. So we don't want this page. We want to show this page instead. So we can go to our index.html. We did this last week, and we're going to change the tag. So instead of showing the default component, we're going to show our app project. So we're going to change inside of client source. We're changing index.html. So it's going to use our component instead. When we go back, now we get an error. Sorry, we don't get an error, but nothing shows up. So we also need, we did this last week. We're now going to go into our app.module.ts, and we need to change our bootstrap component. Instead of it loading the app component, our startup component will be project. So I'm going to change line 18, and that's in app.module.ts. So we did these things last week. And now when we reload, it loads our HTML page. So we've done three things here. We ran ng generate component, started the server back up. We've changed our index.html to use our new component. And then in our app.module.ts, we've changed the bootstrap so that our component gets loaded by default. Okay, so now our page loads our new component. So now we need to make the new layer that we don't have before. This service layer that, as Maggie and Justin said, it's going to act as the interface. It's going to be the bridge between our Angular, our component that interacts with our HTML. And on the other end of things, it's going to call the API on the server to fetch the list of projects and grab the JSON data. So we're going to make a services folder in here, and then we're going to generate a service. So in my app folder, I'm going to make a new directory called services. I'm then going to use the Angular CLI to generate a new service file. So I'll hit Control C here. I'll stop the Angular server again. And I want to enter the new folder I made called services. So we'll type, cd, it's src app and services. So we're going to go into services and we're going to generate ng generate service. And we're also going to call it project. And it creates a TypeScript file called project.service.ts. So this file, this is the file that's going to make calls to our backend API. And it will receive data, and it'll be able to pass data to our component, and then our component can pass it to our HTML. We'll add some CSS with Bootstrap and stuff later. So in order for this service to be able to make HTTP calls to the API, we need to add the HTTP library. So we're going to add HTTP library to make calls to server API. So we're going to import the Angular HTTP client library, because we can't make HTTP calls to our localhost 3000 API without this HTTP client. We're then going to use dependency injection, which we talked about last semester in terms of we used it for our database connections in our .NET controllers. A controller depended on, it required a database connection to work. Well, our service requires an HTTP connection, an HTTP client to work. So in the constructor, so service requires an HTTP client when created. And now we want to create a get method. So we'll call it get projects. And this is where we want to call the API. So we can call the get method, and the get method asks us for a URL. For right now, we'll hard code the URL. Later on, we want to move this. So this is the URL of our get method. When we have a GET request, we are going to send it to our API, and we're going to return whatever comes out of this. So I've added line 3. I guess I can put it all up on Pastebin. That's fine. That's easier. So there's your link. I'll give you a minute to catch up if you need to. So we've added a reference to the Angular HTTP library. We're saying our service requires the HTTP client when it gets called. And we're making a call to our API backend. So we've coded one of the 3 layers of our Angular app. We've coded the service. We'll need to code the component. We'll need to code the HTML. We'll need to add some CSS. And we have to do some configuration. So we need to go back to our app.module.ts. We've got our component here. We need to add the service and HTTP module. So we're going to import the project service. And we're going to import the HTTP client module. So we need both of these references in our app module, which is like our main kind of configuration file. In the imports, I'm also going to add now the HTTP client module to our list of imports. And in our providers, we're going to add the service. So a provider is some kind of data provider, some object that offers data. So I'm going to add that service here. So our app module knows there is data coming through this service. I can put this up on Pastebin as well. Here's the Pastebin link with the modified, the new version of app.module.ts. So we've added imports on lines 9 and 10. We've added the service. We've added our client module. We've imported the client module, and we've added the service to the list of providers. So for now, for fetching the data, we've done the service layer. We now need our component to talk to the service. And then we need to code our project.html so that we can receive that JSON object with all our projects. We can receive this data, and we can render it into an HTML table as a loop. So our next step is to modify our Angular component to call the service and work with the data that the service gets from the API. So go to our project.component.ts. We need to import the service. Reference service that calls the server API. So we're going to import our project service. We're going to modify our constructor so whenever the component gets called, it automatically requires an instance of our service. So you can't use the component without a service object. And we'll just set up a project variable. Create variable to hold list of projects. So now we need a get method that will call the service. Oops. So we'll say this dot project service dot get projects. So this makes an asynchronous call. And we're going to use a method called subscribe. Subscribe uses an object called an observable. So this allows us to make a callback and wait for some kind of response. So we're going to call our service hoping to get back project data. And when we do, when we get a response back, we're going to set this dot projects to the JSON that comes back. So call our service, call the get projects method in the service, which calls the get method of our server API, and it will return whatever response comes back, which we hope is a 200 status with a bunch of project data. And we want to call this method as soon as the component gets created. Call method to fetch data when this component gets created. So we'll call this dot get projects. So whenever we create our project component, we want it to immediately call this method, talk to the service calls the server API, fetches the projects, and then passes the JSON back. I can make a new paste here. So as soon as our app loads, we want to go our component to call the service, our service to call the server API, which gets the data from MongoDB, passes it to the service, back to the component, and then we want to display it on this page. So now in our HTML, let's create what do we got? A name, due date, and course. Sorry about that. Thanks, hon. Thanks for letting me know. Good news for all those who cares, which are probably just me. Blue Jays are winning already. Good start to the season. So if we go back, oh, my app is offline, so I'm going to need to go back to the client folder. So I've got to go up 3 folders and run ngserve again. So I'll do cd ... 3 times. First to get out of the services folder. Then I want to get out of my app folder. Then I want to get out of my source folder. So I'm back in the client directory, and now I can run ngserve. It'll take a minute to compile. Once it reloads, we should see a table header. Okay. So now we've got this table heading. We'll add some CSS after. So now we should be able to add what do we want? tr star ng4. We'll just say p of projects. So we're going to loop through the projects, right? Because projects is defined in our component. We've declared it here. So this is available in the HTML. And now we just use our handlebars p dot. I'll have to think about that. We may be missing something here, but let's check my component. Ah, yes. Okay, we'll need to. It doesn't recognize names, so we'll need to make one more change. That's okay. P dot due date. P dot course. Now you can see it's not recognizing these. So we've got to define these properties. Name, due date, and course, they have to be defined in the component. Right now, nothing shows up. So here's the HTML. But we've got to define these properties, a string, a date, and a string. Thought I missed something in the component. That's okay, we can go back and fix it. So here's the HTML. It's pretty simple. Just HTML with an ng4 that we used last week and our handlebars tags to output the server the component values. But we do need to define these properties because right now they show as unresolved. So I'm going to go back to my component and we'll declare the other properties. We'll also include an ID because we're going to need that later. So our ID is going to be for MongoDB as a string. Our name is a string. Our due date is a date. Okay, it didn't like date. Doesn't have a date. So we'll just define the date as a string for now. So I'm going to add that into my component where we're setting out the properties. Interesting. Not sure why that's unresolved. Okay, let me just think about this for just a second. Let's just see what happens. I'll go back to the browser. Okay, we're missing something small. I got to think about it for a minute. Hung, I see your note. Is there any clue in the console? Okay, bear with me for a sec. We're on the right track. Saying that's unused. We're just missing something small here. Okay, you know what? Let's pause here. That'll give me a minute to not take up your time. I'll have a look and figure out what I've missed and why these properties are not being recognized. Well, even without the ID, I mean, for the moment, we don't really even need the ID. So I could take the ID out. But it's still not being recognized here. Which it should be. Okay, we'll take a pause here. We'll clean this up after we take a break. We'll be back in 10. Hung, did you want to explain? Oh, yes, thank you. It has to be in the constructor? Yep, I'm in the component screen. I'm just going to stop the recording.